It's finally finished. A memoir of my life written in red ink. Oh, barnacles.
Look, it's very weird making a video about this team, specifically because of the fact that at the beginning of the year, when they benched Bryce Young, we all collectively thought that was one of the dumbest decisions the Panthers could ever made. But now, why does it feel like the most successful team in the NFC South this year was the Panthers of all teams? It's just so weird because this team started out with one of the worst records in football, getting absolutely torched by the Saints, scoring 3 points against the Chargers, and then, they get a win against the Raiders, but Andy Dalton's just good against them. But then losing to the Bengals, getting mollywopped by Caleb Williams, and then just losing to the Falcons, and then lastly, the Marcus Mariota game against the Commanders. Simply put, by that point, everything in Panthers fandom was dead. Nothing was going on, and it was just a completely miserable and unwatchable team up until that point. And granted, the game after wasn't that great, but look at it this way. In the game against the Broncos, one of the strongest defenses in the NFL, Bryce Young looked decent. He still threw 2 picks and wasn't the best, but he looked competent. So what? That's whatever. But the bad game didn't stop. After the Broncos, the Panthers went and just beat the Saints. Yeah, Bryce Young still wasn't the greatest, but he did enough to beat the Saints. Not to mention, too, he led a drive down the field, and most of all, they got the touchdown. After that, we then go to the next game against the Giants in Germany, where the Panthers win in overtime. And the Panthers started to have a win streak, which started to get a lot of people kind of confused. So are the Panthers finally, decent now? Granted, they were coming off a team that played Derek Carr, and I believe Daniel Jones still to that point. But then the Chiefs game happened. A game where everyone was like, yeah. Even with the Chiefs up to that point, everyone knew the Chiefs were going to win that game. But the strangest thing was, they almost won. If it wasn't for a bullshit fucking penalty and Patrick Mahomes turning into a demigod for maybe 1% of the game, the Panthers tied the Chiefs and were looking to actually beat them. Granted, the field goal happened. But then, after that, you had the Buccaneers game. The Bucs are still trying to fight for the playoffs, and they're still a relatively decent team. Another close loss. And then the Eagles game happened, where I don't even know if that's still a catch or not, but the Panthers almost knocked off the Eagles. So, all of this to say, the Panthers up until this point were weird, but in a good way that we haven't seen in a while. And comparatively, that's way better than last year when it was just, get blown out, Bryce Young looks awful, get blown out. Now, granted, they still didn't finish off the season the greatest, but still, to finish off, they got close against the Cardinals, of course, got mollywopped by the Buccaneers, but still, Bryce Young had a decent game, and then came Week 18. Now, I know it's weird to be like, when's Bryce Young's moment gonna happen? Because not everyone is gonna have those moments. Not every top pick quarterback will have those moments, because ultimately you just sometimes gotta do the job. But Bryce Young had that moment. He not only took his team down the field and scored, but he ended up leading his offense to 44 points in that game against the Falcons, who were fighting, who were playing everyone just to have a sniff at the playoffs. It's just crazy to think that the Panthers went from one of the most miserable teams to exist to a team that, looked good enough to scrape by against good teams. It's weird. We were going to make an Untitled Panthers project on this team way earlier in the year, but things fell through, and it just shows how much a season can just change an outcome. From starting off one of the worst records in football to now seemingly being a team that could have probably competed for the division if it wasn't for those awful games near the end. It's just weird, because I feel more faith and more confidence in this team than I do anyone else in the South. The Saints have nowhere to go because they're stuck in cap hell. The Falcons are one of the most confusing teams right now, whether they want to be good or not, and the Buccaneers, they just can't get any luck. But Bryce Young looks like a solid quarterback, and if he can continue that development going into next year, the Panthers might not just, make some noise in the middle of the season, but they could very well be someone fighting for the division near the end. But that all depends on Bryce Young's development. But it also needs to be said too, I don't think any of this happens without Dave Canales. He is the QB whisperer for a reason. That man turned Baker Mayfield, who was completely and utterly broken, into one of the best players in the league last year. And he did numbers for Bryce Young. Everyone criticized him for, benching him, but that was probably the best thing that happened to Bryce Young. And I'll fully admit, I was wrong in that aspect. Now, going into the offseason, the Panthers really need to start fixing some things. But for now, going from having no hope to a foundation you can build off of does numbers for an organization. And simply put, they're just decent. Granted, their rushing offense was just great at the end of the year. 8th in touchdowns is amazing. Not to mention, too, Chuba Hubbard was slowly but surely growing into a stud. So, main thing about this, Panthers need to get a little bit better on both the offense and the defense. Not everything is there. They still have a lot of young guys, but getting a little bit more players on defense, getting an edge rusher or two, this team could very well be something special. But again, like every other team, you have to be good consistently. And if next year they're good consistently, the Panthers might be a team that the entire league will have to watch out for.